This week.
I'm good. Yeah, I just was back from a little short trip to SF. I went out for OpenAI Dev Day on Monday, which was super fun. And then I've been sort of news. Maybe we'll get into it some future date. I'm starting a little company with my wife, so I've just been sort of cranking on prototypes and stuff, which has been super fun. Kids are good. It's kind of the fall season of colds, but yeah, feeling
Yeah.
happy and mostly hopeful these days. And how are you?
Yeah. I can relate to the fall session of colds. Hold on a second. I'm worried we're not live on YouTube. Let me make sure we're actually live. And then let's see. Oh, we are. Okay, cool. Yeah, we also have the fall season of colds. The youngest was pretty cranky last night, but good. I'm excited. It feels like there is an explosion of AI coding agents. I feel like
Yes.
we're in a moment of change. And our first moment of change, it doesn't feel like totally driven by a model launch,
Yes.
maybe. So I'm
Totally.
excited to unpack that a little bit with you. I'm excited to hear about OpenAI Dev Day because I
Sure.
watch us from afar as you go and hang out with the cool kids. So yeah, I mean, any observations before we?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I won't go over like the official OpenAI announcements. I'm not sure I could add much that you couldn't read elsewhere, but I think for me, I guess I've gone to like five of these conferences, and it's a
Mm,
little bit of a way for like kind of little checkpoints for me to kind of step back and observe, what's changed. And so I've gone to all three of the OpenAI Dev Days and then
mm,
both of the AI Eng World's fairs.
mm,
And like, the AI Eng World's fairs were great. It's not sort of one, it's like a lot of, diversity of like different folks there.
mm,
But there was this big gap between those two. The first one, I heard tons about agents and agent orchestration, blah, 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 but nobody could show me an agent. And this like about a year and a half ago. It's like there weren't reasoning models. It was just like you could barely really build, you could tell a story of what an agent would be, but you couldn't really build them. The second year,
yeah.
a year later, it was like, oh yeah, now at least for coding, there's like a lot of agents and they work. For the dev days, I think the first one was probably the theme. If I had to summarize, was like multimodal. We
Hmm.
were like just adding. Oh, now they can see. Now they can generate images. Like, what about audio? So that was
Hmm.
sort of like the year of multimodal is coming up. The second one, I guess, a year ago. I think like voice and sort of the real time API was one theme. They had done advanced
Hmm.
voice mode, so people were thinking about how does voice change how we interact. But then I think they were also excited about reasoning, even though I don't think we had externally quite figured out what the implications were. But like the researchers were like, yeah, reasoning is going to be a thing.
Hmm.
This is like, a one preview only came out like, I guess about a year ago.
Jeez.
And then this one, I think partly it's like I think OpenAI is kind of a bigger company now, and they're just
Yeah.
they're just placing a lot of bets. They seem pretty bottoms up. They have a culture of just like you could ship things. It's like not and so they have some consumer stuff, they have some API stuff. They're just like it's kind of a big company that is just places a lot of bets. But for me, I think the main value of these conferences is like the hallway conversations with
Hmm.
just builders who are
Hmm.
trying to kind of push tools in ways that people haven't done before. So that's where I get a lot of the value. I'm like swapping tips. Hey, how are you doing X? Or can we
Mm.
like how do we do this parallel thing? Has anyone figured this out? What is a Git work tree? Like it's all these kind of conversations that I get a lot of value out of.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it feels like I'm noticing two things right now. Thing one is that uh, AI engineering is becoming more accepted, and people. I mean, I always view this stuff from as an outsider because I was not somebody who coded prior to GPT-4. GPT-4 made
Hmm.
it possible for me to code. Um, and I would describe some of the things that I was doing sometimes, and some of the real engineers that I'm friends with would kind of look at me like they would like kind of wondering, probably the same way that they look at people with AI psychosis. They're like, this can't
Hmm.
possibly be working. But I'm like, no, 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 it's on my machine. It runs. Like I can do all the things now. I just do
Yeah.
it. I do it differently than you do it. And now I see people who I view as like serious engineers being like, oh yeah, I'm using
Hmm.
parallel coding agents, and there's kind of an explosion of those different tools out in the world.
Totally.
So anyway, you have been, I think, playing with Factory a little bit. What do you have any
Yeah, I mean it's
early
interesting.
thoughts?
I think we are in this kind of like multi-agent world now, at least in coding, and I
Mm,
actually don't really know to what extent agents will work in other verticals or other use cases, but certainly in
mm,
coding, I think partly because we just have a lot of existing tooling to kind of keep things on the rails, that, testing and linting and formatting and CI systems and all these kind of things that are like kind of designed to like give feedback to human engineers and kind of prevent costly mistakes. I think those things really benefit, the coding agents as well. Um, I guess, when I sort of reflect a little bit on just like my own coding journey with AI, I feel like there's almost been like a few different eras.
Mm,
There was kind of the ChatGPT era, I mean,
mm,
and it's hard to remember. ChatGPT is less than 3 years old. It was like December 22, right? So like it's
yeah.
like about 2.5 years, it's pretty compressed. And in the ChatGPT era, I was using it quite a bit, sort of alongside more normal coding, and it was kind of like the Stack Overflow replacement for me. It was like, oh, I need information, or hey, what's the stack trace? And it was like a helpful kind of like way to understand or learn things, but mostly wasn't writing that much of my code. And then
Hmm.
we started, okay, we had 3.5, and GPT-4 was getting smarter. Then I think when it went to like Claude 3.5 Sonnet, I was like, oh, this thing can code like better than, and there was sort of that whole era. And I was often using, Claude Chat and doing a bunch of copy paste. But then I think for me at least, then we went into the kind of the first kind of coding agents, and Claude
Mm,
Code was the first one that stuck for me. They didn't
mm,
start it. There was Devin, there was others, but for me, like Claude Code clicked in some way that I was like, oh wow, this thing, it actually is able to follow instructions. It's getting information by calling tools and kind of finding its way around. And I was that was like, it was really like Claude Code. And I guess when Sonnet 4 came out, that I just had this like aha moment of like, oh yeah, this is like, these things are really starting to work. They can take big, I can write a whole long spec and it can like finish it. And now I think we're almost in this like multi-agent world, or at least I personally feel like I am, because I use some of Codex. Codex is great. I
mhm.
still use some Claude Code. I'm playing with the sort of factory droids. There's probably a bunch of others out there, and it's like they're all, there's a certain form factor, there's a certain model, there's
Mhm.
like a surface where it lives, and I think we're just in this like really rich kind of world right now where we're all experimenting. And it's like when I hop on calls with people like, what are you using? And yeah,
Well, and
it's really
you're
interesting.
right that it's going so fast. So I guess in the interest of full disclosure, I've just wrapped up doing some consulting with the RuCode team,
Hmm.
and which is kind of in the same segment as Factory and Sculptor and Conductor and a couple of the
Hmm.
other ones.
Amp, I've also heard, yeah.
Amp is another one, and
Hmm.
I was shocked how quickly Factor just had like all of the surfaces that
Yeah.
seemed relevant, right? Like, it doesn't take a genius to kind of be like, okay, well, some coding kind of feels more native on the web, some
Hmm.
feels a little bit more native locally. Sometimes you want an extension, sometimes you want a CLI
Hmm.
tool, and Factor is just like, hey, here, they're all
Yeah.
here.
Right.
And I have on my list to kind of kick it a little bit more. Um, but I really do think that's the future. And honestly, if I'm looking one step ahead, I sort of suspect that long term you're going to kind of merge together Linear and GitHub,
Mm-hmm.
because what seems to be relevant is the like business goal
Hmm.
with the spec or the markdown files
Hmm.
to tie
Hmm.
back into
Markdown
spec hub,
coding. Hmm.
the markdown coding, and then the conversations and the changes off of those into
Hmm.
the branch and the pull request. Like that to
Hmm.
me feels like the essential line, and then everything else is just like places to mess around with stuff.
Totally. Yeah,
But
I mean, one theme here seems to be, so I've been using these factory droid. If people don't know, factory is kind of, I guess, a startup that they call them droids, but that's their kind of little primitive, and you can use them in the web browser, you can use them in your IDE, or you can use them in your terminal. And so I've actually been using them as my kind of daily driver the last few days, but also I still am using some Codex or Cloud Code in my IDE. But I think what's interesting, yeah, they kind of have all of the surfaces, and I think one of the themes for me, and also just thinking about like conversations with kind of builders at the dev day, I think we're all trying to figure out like how can you make a parallel, like to what extent can I parallelize what I'm doing? Like I'm kind of the bottleneck for all of this stuff. And I think like how do we blend kind of what's good about remote agents with local? And so, when I used kind of the first version of OpenAI Codex, they just kind of bet completely on remote. And I think remote clearly has some advantages. Like you can do things in parallel. Everything's isolated, so there's no stepping on toes. They're all in sort of separate branches, so that's great. But then, if I need to tweak something, it actually isn't like it's not. It's like harder to iterate, right? So whereas like local, it's like, oh, sweet, we're just sort of pair programming in here. It's just in my editor. I can review. It like feels very natural. But then like you have this stepping on toes problem. So do I create separate branches? That's what Conductor does.
Mhm.
Like I honestly tried this like Git work trees thing that people talk about. I even like, had Claude write me some scripts to try to manage work trees, and I like wasn't smart enough to figure it out. I was just like spending too much time on like work tree management. I was like, wait, I just want to be like writing the code. So that didn't work for me. But I still haven't totally figured out like Factory's approach, but they have this like bridge that you go through the onboarding flow and you kind of like install a piece of software locally and you type this little code and it somehow like the browser and my local machine are kind of able to communicate. But I don't know. Yeah, I think everything's kind of built on like Git down below, but I almost wonder. It feels like we're kind of like grasping for like what are the sort of primitives or workflows to kind of make this work better with AI. Maybe we need some new layer on top of Git that just like helps. Like I think Git will always be there, but like
Mm,
yeah, what is the sort of workflow that
mm.
makes these things easier to more ergonomic, easier to use?
Yeah, I'm so surprised. I would love to hear you unpack a little bit more how you're using the bridge because I uh, did a series of user interviews with people around that like bridging concept, and I had
Hmm.
a bunch of people kind of look at me and just be like, "When would I ever use that? What is your use
Hmm.
case here?"
I don't know. I can't say that I've like really figured it out. I mean, but I see everybody kind of pushing some in that direction. I mean, like in the Codex, the OpenAI Codex version of this is they started with remote only.
Hmm.
Now I can use Codex locally, but they even have a little switcher that I could sort of do something locally, but then switch to the remote. And so I don't know. It is a little bit of a yeah. It's like they both have advantages. I haven't really figured out like how to do them in some seamless way.
Mm,
I mean, I guess I've been like I must. I'm curious, like from you, like one of the things I just when I talk to folks, on Monday at the Dev Day, we're all sort of talking about this, like what can you do in parallel, or Simon Willinson, who I'm sure we both read, he had a recent thing. He's like, oh, okay, he's trying out parallel, he's getting it to work. Like we're all sort of like some things work, but also it's like kind of overwhelming. Like
yeah.
I actually pushed myself one Friday after I think you and I chatted, where I was like, I wonder how parallel I could go. And I tried to cross multiple projects, and that
Hmm.
was easier than within one project. And I think I tried working on like 4 or 5 projects at once, just kicking little things forward, and it like
Mm,
kind of worked. But I also felt like drained at the end of the day. I'm just like, oof,
hmm.
I'm trying to like conduct like 5 things. It's just like felt like really extreme multitasking, and so now I'm trying to be a little bit more single threaded on like, okay, one thing coding at a time. But I can often kick off research things in parallel or planning
Mm.
things in parallel. But I feel like the phase right now, yeah, I haven't really seen best practices emerge yet, I guess, which is why it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I will not say that I have best practices, but I will say so a lot of what you say resonates with me. I will oftentimes, it's either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. I will have, so far, I haven't found a tool that I love that allows me to do everything in parallel. So I end up on actually, my wife's monitor setup allows me to have three monitors, which means I can sort of squeeze in four VS Codes open.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Two of them are usually like more incremental, like bug fixy things, like where
Mm-hmm.
I just have this hit list of little stuff in the apps that I'm working on where I'm like, I don't like this, or this isn't quite right, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then I have one thing, one bigger feature where um, the agent is mostly running,
Mm-hmm.
and then usually one thing that I'm specking. Um, the place where I'm trying to push myself a little bit more is I don't even know what to call these. I think actually, one of the play you would call these what's the first level, like defining the problem. So you define the
Mm-hmm.
problem, define the approach, define the details. I have a
Mm-hmm.
list of things where I actually don't know what the problem is yet.
Right.
Um, and what I have started trying to do with those is say, like I'll use the little social cards on
Mm-hmm.
every app that I work on suck.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be like, hey, my social cards suck. I would like them to look nice. Can you
Yeah.
come up with 10 ideas that they could be better? Um, and then it's a little bit, that's not something that's so core to the experience that like I have to like obsess over it. At the same time, it
Mm-hmm.
is a little detail that like helps and makes
Mm-hmm.
it better.
Mm-hmm.
Bothers me. I'm sick of them sucking.
Mm-hmm.
That has helped me get like a fourth project in there. With that
Mm-hmm.
said, it definitely feels like spinning plates, and at a certain point in
Mm-hmm.
time, I feel my energy crash and I feel the plates start to drop. And then occasionally the
Yeah.
next day I'm like looking at it and I'm like, I gotta throw
Right.
this project out, right? That feels weird, right? Because we've kind of come up in a world of software where you really don't want to throw whole projects away, right? And
Hmm.
if you threw away a week of a team's work, I mean, maybe if you were in like a growth hacking stage, that would be acceptable, but
Hmm.
like in general, that was wasted time. You didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it's super interesting. It was interesting what you kind of said about like linear and GitHub merging. I mean, um, I tend to maybe what sort of feels scatterbrained is like we have to kind of operate at different altitudes. So the
Hmm.
most zoomed out altitude is like scoping or like how where are we even going or
Hmm.
like kind of prioritization. I think one we have these rituals like sprint planning that we've developed and they serve different purposes. One purpose is just like prioritization. Like hey, there's always a million things we should do. Let's like pick some of the things that are most important or highest impact. Let's go do these.
Hmm.
But then as you start to zoom in, okay, we've picked this problem to work on. Now there's probably different approaches we could take, different trade-offs, some of them have user experience trade-offs. Some of them might be, do we choose this tech stack or that tech stack? So you sort of like lower altitude. And then you get down in the details of like the actual code or the pixels. And so well, I guess it's like I'm trying to figure out like in this weird world we're in now, it's kind of this mix of like the maker and manager schedules at the same time, where I still
Hmm.
want the flow state just for my own mental health, my own enjoyment. That like
Hmm.
we're technologists, we write code, we build things like and it feels good to like get flow. And so sometimes I'll go into more of like a planning phase, I guess, and I might spend a couple hours like let me just sort of like make plans and ideally they're each small. Like how do I just crank out a bunch of like plan docs that are like well scoped, ready to go? We made decisions. And then I'm okay. Now I'm more in the delivery phase. Okay, like let's just like kick those off and start to monitor. I'm reviewing, I'm testing, but like switching back and forth between altitudes is a bit jarring.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah, it's like kind of like how do we manage our own energy and just like the psychology of like what it's like to build now that is is different than before.
Well, and I want to write about this at some point, but one of the things that was eye-opening working with the Rucode team is so they've gone to they've said this publicly, so I'm not stepping on anything here, but they've gone to prototype first. So there is no unless something is very, very complicated, and occasionally there were very, very complicated things, but in general, you would start with a pretty quick PR, and you would kind of
Hmm.
come to the team meeting and you would say, I'm thinking about improving the onboarding with something that
Hmm.
looks vaguely like that. And then
Hmm.
you had a conversation that felt a little bit like a design critique, a little bit
Hmm.
around like, okay, who do we think the user is here?
Hmm.
Um, but and then from there, things would get a little bit more incremental, a little bit more incremental, maybe like three of these loops. Some of them would happen async and eventually would get merged.
Hmm.
And on the whole, it was much, much faster. You kind of dropped out the like 2 week warm up that you would have where like product and design would kind of spin up and then there'd be a handoff and then Andrew would go build it.
Yeah.
And it was also super confusing because the team was awesome there. They're like so mature, so thoughtful, and we didn't have the words to talk about like which things need a project brief and which don't. Which
Totally.
ones, what does it look like to do the handoff? And I've done
Right.
most of the AI building I've done by myself, and so you don't really get frustrated with yourself when you've
Hmm.
changed. You might feel like you wasted some time, but there's not like and it was confusing. It was confusing at
Hmm.
times to be like, whoa, wait a second, how does this work?
Totally.
So
Yeah, I mean that resonates. I mean, I just think about different ways that this idea of like kind of sprint planning. Like I've never really learned the sort of agile rituals about this stuff, but it's just kind of like different teams I've been on. We kind of adapt to like what works best for us. Like
yeah.
in the early days of Dropbox when we were smaller, and there was just like one desktop team, one iOS team, one Android team.
Mm,
Every team was kind of picking their own way to do sprints, and some
mm,
was like 2 week, kind of planning cycle, some were 1 week. Eventually, when we got bigger, and there started to be kind of more dependencies across teams.
mm,
I think we tried quarterly once, and it was like a disaster. Like things went well for like the first half of the quarter, and then went off the rails. We're like, that's too long. So then we did like 6 week sprints, which were
mhm,
kind of planning, coming together. Executives kind of reviewing. Okay, there's dependencies here, but then
mhm,
internally, teams were sort of using whatever process they wanted. But
mhm,
one of the things that's funny now is like sometimes I'll be in like a Claude chat where I have some long thread where we're talking about the project and planning, and it's basically using that to like write specs that I'm handing off to Claude Code or whoever. And it's always funny when it does these like time estimations, because it'll be like, yes, fantastic, I'll break that down for you, and it'll be like, phase one, like, day 1 to 2, like phase two, and I'm like, we're gonna just get this done in like 10 or 15 minutes, so
Yeah.
it's still almost like trying to estimate kind of like human engineer time as a way to kind of constrain scope or set expectations, except it's just like compressed. And so it's like hard to, even if you're wearing kind of the PM hat where you're like, oh, I need to like scope these, or things are ambiguous, or like, do users even want this? It's like, it just feels even like, how do I stay ahead of like, wait, the last stuff's already done, like it's back in my court already.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, my favorite thing, I'm gonna start screenshotting these and then actually posting how long it took Claude or GPT-5 to do them, where it'll be like, yeah, this is like a 7 week project, and then like like 8 minutes later, it's like, okay, it's all built.
Yeah, maybe we just need to like post some screenshots. We'll figure out what the multiplier is. Like it used to be when an engineer like gave me any time estimation, I would like mentally triple it in my head, just
Mhm.
because like it's hard to estimate, and there's unforeseen things. But yeah, this is almost like the reverse. It's like, okay, you said 3 days, but let me divide by, what is it? I don't know, 20, or it's like,
And there's these things that it does perfectly every single time, and then there are these things where I can't for the life of me
yeah.
like get it to fit. I always have this problem with CSS where
Mm,
like dark mode in particular
mm,
is now there's some things that I've broken in my own stack that I know that I'm not doing correctly, but yeah, I'll sit there and be like, no, 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 the button still is the wrong color. Here is the
right,
screenshot,
right.
and it'll be like, you must need to like clear your cache. I'm like, it's not the cache.
Yeah.
Like I know it's not the cache, and
You're gaslighting me.
deep down,
Yeah.
you know it's not the cache.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, dark mode's a funny one because, one of I have sort of my next blog post that I drafted, and I need to kind of get it over the finish line. But I'm sort of thinking about this idea of like, when are prompts programs? Because we
Hmm.
sort of started in this idea of, because a prompt, but in the beginning, we had this like completions API. It was just like you put in text and it completed your text.
Hmm.
And then we moved to like messages. Okay, now there's like
Hmm.
user message, assistant message. Yeah, but we still have this idea like prompt engineering, maybe context engineering. But there's this like subset of prompts that it's not all of them, but I think of them actually as programs. And
Hmm.
so one of the examples for me is like dark mode, which often I don't really need to add dark mode to an app, but that was a pattern that like occasionally I would do. And so I have a script, as I call it, it's a fuzzy script, and it's called like add dark mode.exe.md. It's like an executable that is just like ready. I just open a new Claude code. It's for a certain stack. It's like, this is assuming Next.js and Chadcian or whatever it is. Like that, that's sort of the constraint.
Hmm.
And I can just paste this script and hit enter and like go do something else. And it just like perfectly adds dark mode. And it's like a set of, instructions that a junior engineer could follow, and I've done it enough that I just know it works. And so I have a few of those kinds of things where it's like, now my starter project, I used to have dark mode in there because like sometimes I wanted it, but I would delete it otherwise. Now I'm like, why would I add that? Like, let me just start with like the bare bones project that just has as many constraints as I can. It's sort of set up, but then sometimes I want to add dark mode. I have another one that's for adding convex, which is kind of my current favorite backend. But like sometimes I don't want to start with a database, but when I do, I'm like, add convex, and it actually, it goes through the steps that it can do, but sometimes it'll sort of pause and be like, hey, you need to go and like do this thing in the convex dashboard. So it's almost just like a set of
Hmm.
steps, a little recipe that mostly it can do. It has me do a few, and it'll say, start the convex like dev thing and tell me when you see like success. I'm like, yep, all good. So we're kind of like, but it speeds it up every time I need to add convex. And so I almost wonder, like, I wish like convex itself would maintain that thing of just like, here is the sort of like markdown set of instructions
Oh,
somewhere
that's a
to
great
just like add
idea.
this to your stack. Because the nice thing about these kinds of like text recipes, like, they're not deterministic. You give up like, traditional code like runs the same way every time, but it's not very composable. Whereas these like English specs, I'm just like, cool, let me grab this one, let me grab that one. I'll just sort of build my stack really quickly because like the agents can just follow directions. So
Hmm.
I have a dark mode script for
Do you
you
have a way to
someday if you want.
distribute that? Is it on GitHub? I mean, like, I'm trying to think. I mean, it feels like the natural way
Yeah.
would be to import that. But
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
powerful.
I don't I want to move in that direction. So right now I have a few scripts in a folder in my like, I just have a starter project called like hold and start, just like it's really
Mm.
just for me. It's like my preferred stack for working with AI. And I have a few in a
Gotcha.
folder there. So I actually have speckhub.com, which I'm planning to do something with at some point, but I just, it's like still not quite sure what it is, but I wanted a place for me. And I'm actually quite like wary of like trying to build that for real, like for other people, or like I just, once you kind of have a sharing model or the primitives, they become very hard to change. I haven't even yet really solved my own problem yet. But
Mm,
for what I want is, here is a sort of reusable set of instructions I can put somewhere. It shouldn't belong in like this repo, because I also want to use it over in this other project.
mm,
And I also don't want it to live only locally. Like I want it to be sort of something that it lives in the cloud. It's like kind of like a GitHub gist. It's like not a whole repo. It's not heavy. It's just like, here's a markdown gist of
mm,
like that I want to use,
mm,
and it has a name. And then I want to be able to like copy it, and I can paste it anywhere. Maybe I paste it in ChatGPT or Claude.
mm.
I want to pull it at the CLI and just be like, cool, go grab that thing and just pipe it to wherever, pipe it to a droid, pipe it to Codex. And so
Mm.
I don't know. I've been playing with, the theme of sort of my blog and kind of this markdown coding idea is like, how do we enable some amount of kind of composition and reuse for like these English specs, in the way that we have, a lot of experience doing this for code, or, functions, things like that. But I don't know. Yes, I should find ways to share these, just so I can
I mean, I
say,
would
hey,
take
here's
a
my developments.
gist, right? Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that would be cool. I think that'd be cool.
yeah,
I
maybe
also
gist would
wonder,
be just the simple way to
at least as a starting
just,
point, I agree that you're not ready on Spec Hub to make to like put together. This is like the step before that, right? It's like,
yeah.
but I do suspect, like, I have a project right now that's built on a similar stack to yours. I would like it to support, like, I would at least try that out and be like, hey,
Hmm.
does it work on my machine?
Hmm.
Anyway, that would be cool.
I like, maybe you've nudged me toward like I should just start with gist. I feel a little bit stuck on this one, because I'm like, I know there's good ideas here, but it's like in what shape? And so I guess the cheapest MVP for me would probably be to just start like curating a list of useful gists for myself, and then like a place to put those. I don't know. It's like on my website, or like a
Just
Google
needs to
Doc, or
be a
just like my
link
useful.
that Claude Code can access, right? Because it doesn't have to
Hmm.
stay in my repo, because I'm not going to rerun
Yeah.
it 25
Mm-mm.
times. I'm going to basically be like, hey, do this. Um,
Right.
it rhymes with me with some of what people are doing, where they strip out the HTML out of their docs files
Mm.
for like Bun. I don't actually know what Bun is, but Bun and Stripe, I think both have done this.
Hmm.
And they're doing it to make it more accessible to agents, which is like,
Hmm.
okay, congrats, you're saving me tokens. I don't care about tokens,
Right.
uh, but I mean, it does feel like tools for agents is a place that I'm
Yes.
so interested. I think there is going to
Yeah.
be,
Totally.
in part because of my experience with Hey Recap, where I'm to get better performance. Effectively, what I'm doing is I'm adding tools for the agent, and it has an interface, and simplicity matters in that interface, and like
Hmm.
clarity matters. Is all of the things that matter for
Hmm.
humans, except it's for an LLM, and I mean, API designers
Totally.
are just going to be in
Yeah.
set for life, right? Like the people that really
Yeah.
can get an awesome API are going to be able to make awesome agent tools, and it's just going to be,
I was talking to
uh,
someone this morning who's like working on an API at a company, and he was saying like really thinking about like the error messages being super
mm,
important, because
mm,
errors happen. If you have a well-written error message, like explain what went wrong, an agent will be able to likely use that information and go fix it. If you're, one of the projects I worked on was like for this, this LaTeX, language for mathematics, and one of the challenges, I had a fix loop, but the
mm,
errors were often pretty poor, because they're in a very old compiler that's like decades old. So it just would say like undefined control sequence, and like that could mean a bunch of different possible things that went wrong. So I think, yeah, it's like if we
mm,
sort of like shift our mental frame to thinking that most software in the future, if not now already in some pockets, I think is going to be written by agents, and we are going to be directing the agents, giving them the goals and the scoping, and we're still talking to humans in the world, and there's a lot of
mm,
messiness, and like it's still just as hard to figure out what do people actually want. It's
mm,
still hard to align people, write down what is the spec for the thing, but like this, the code will likely be written by agents. And so I think just thinking, yeah, what does that mean for APIs? What does it mean for designs? Like a big area where I'm thinking is like,
mm, mm,
how do we load these things up with lots of constraints so they do a good job? So we get, not sort of the opposite of vibe coding, which is often just like go super fast, like, don't really care about the code, but like, how do we make these things secure and like maintainable and high quality? Like there's a lot of
yeah.
bad software in the world that I almost expect most software is bad. It's buggy, like weird things happen. Like my Bluetooth still can't connect in like at the beginning of every meeting. Like that's kind of our baseline expectation is like pretty low. Most things are kind of broken. And how could we actually use this to like, fix a lot of that stuff?
Yeah, I love that. I love that call to arms. I mean, I think especially with the Sora launch, like slop has just taken over
Mm,
people's mental like mind share. And I mean, we almost named the show Vibecraft.
Mm.
Because I'm thinking a lot about that. And then of course Simon Wilson has come in. He's calling this vibe engineering, so that's what it's going to
Right.
be called. We'll all get in line, Simon. I know Vibecraft was my thing, so we'll call it vibe engineering. But I've been thinking a lot about this, and I really do like. Ultimately, it's up to us, right? Like you still
Hmm.
have the choice to make something with care or to make it in a sloppy way, and you can
Hmm.
absolutely use these tools to make things with greater care
Yeah.
than before. I mean, if you think about my parallelism example, it's all of those. Half of the things that I'm doing in parallel are these paper cuts that otherwise would never
Hmm.
get fixed, right? Because
Hmm.
if it was a solo project, I mean, sure, solo projects I think tend to have a higher bar than big company ones because
Hmm.
there's a sense of personal pride on it. But still, at
Hmm.
some point, I have to pick like which of these 50
Yeah.
things am I going to fix, and if I can only fix four,
Totally.
they better be four good ones, right? But if you can fix 14, hopefully we can have better software.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess the bottlenecks all just move around. I mean, I think, if software gets easier to write, then, in a way, every area gets more competitive. Like it may
Mm,
get sort of harder in some ways to like really build something that people want that sort of stands out from the
mm,
crowd. Yeah, I sort of assume slop will sort of flood in various places wherever there's like an economic incentive to create slop, someone's going to create the slop. But like I saw a talk, I guess it was the last AI Eng World's Fair. I think it was the head of engineering at Linear, and I'm forgetting his name, or I would give him credit. But it was a cool talk about how
mm,
my sense is that, I mean, Linear, if you haven't used it, it's like just one of the most beautifully designed, like highest quality products I've used. Like beautiful design, like very
mm,
fast. Like it just, and it's basically like a better Jira. It's like I would almost not have expected you could just go and like make a better Jira and win. But I'm like, yeah, like I would never work at a company that like made me use Jira like ever again, right? Once you've experienced Linear, you're just like, yeah, this is just like, don't take this away from me. But what was interesting is he gave us talk about sort of how they have sort of come to AI, and I think initially they like were not that quick to do it because he sort of said we prototyped some of the same stuff everyone else did, like little chat things and co-pilots, and they just like weren't good enough, so they didn't ship them because their bar's
mm,
pretty high. And now I think as things have gotten better, they're actually like well positioned. How do agents kind of work, within Linear, they have a nice principle. There's always a human owner,
mm,
like it's like
mm,
it's yes, it's this agent, but working for me, and I'm the one that's kind of responsible. But one of the stories he told, which I thought was cool, is like you can imagine a world not that long from now where like these backlogs just start to go away. And like
mhm,
I was a PM most of my career, and when I think about the Dropbox desktop client team or like the Google Maps team I was on, or one of the search teams, you always had this sort of like endlessly growing backlog of like small bugs and paper cuts and polish issues. And it felt
mhm,
really bad as a PM that cares about quality. It probably felt bad to the designer and like some of the engineers too, that you wish you could like go do all this. But even if we spent all of our time and we never built features, like it would
mhm,
probably just always be there.
mhm,
But you could imagine like in the future, like let's say that all these things are in a place like Linear or wherever they are.
mm,
Could I just like select all,
mm,
assign to an agent, and they're not all fixable? Maybe it's like first go try to reproduce this, or is this even clear? Or like can you sort of turn this into like an actual good spec where we know what success looks like, and then we can hand
mm,
them off, and maybe like 30% just get fixed like this week.
mm,
That's like pretty sweet. And then but some of them maybe get archived, they're like no longer
mm,
relevant. But I just think that like I wouldn't even have thought that was possible. But
mm.
like I think that the bar should actually go up because increasingly it's like you're almost not going to have an excuse to just ship buggy software. That was kind of like the only software we knew how to ship. But like if there are some teams out there that at least are figuring out ways to like raise the bar, then like our
Yeah,
expectations as human tool users are sort of like the ceiling will
gonna
just
go up as
constantly
well.
go up, and then you're like,
Yeah,
oh, this buggy software, why would I pay for this?
yeah. The on the Ruko team's public GitHub, because they've got an open source component to their project. Every time a user posts an issue, their agent goes and tries to fix the issue, and I think
Hmm.
they've said that 30% of the time they're accepting the fix. Now,
Oh wow. Hmm.
that 30% is probably the with any open source project, there's a range of issues, and some are
Hmm.
like well crafted and well designed and make it
Hmm.
easy to see what's going wrong, and some of them are somebody just opening an issue and saying bug.
Yeah.
And so my guess is that there's a mix in there, but it is like it's an example of that in the wild.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's very cool.
Uh, do you have an opinion on Sonnet 4.5 versus GPT-5 for
Yeah, the
coding?
truth is I'm using both. I mean, it's funny because like my main use case is coding. I use these things all day long for various types of coding, but like there's not really like one best for coding, right? Because there's
Mm,
different styles of coding. There's like even just for me, I have preferences, but like sometimes I want like a really thorough thing, like, and I use like GPT-5, codex on high reasoning, and I'm like, oh, this is a job for big brain, and like I want you to go really think and like look across the entire code base. Like, I'll give you an example. I had like prototyped some stuff with auth, and I was like, okay, dude, I want you to go do like an auth review and check like every one of these, and like figure out like
Wow.
how do I sort of like have my auth logic in as few places as possible, and I like found a bunch of stuff that's like, yeah, this is like a very thorough kind of like extremely thorough,
Mm,
but it's slow, and I don't want to wait 15 minutes
mm,
usually. Like they could think for
mm,
half an hour if I give it a hard enough job.
mm,
Whereas like I think Claude Code with like Sonnet 4, I think Sonnet 4.5 is good. I think it's, I like it better than 4. It's not like huge step beyond 4. Like they're both,
mm.
they're Sonnet 4 was already pretty good. But to me, that's more like iterative, like often quick things, or almost like pair programming together. And honestly, it's more fun. There's
Mm.
something about just like jamming with Claude Code and Sonnet. It just like feels fun. There's like little delightful, I don't know. It's just like, it's super helpful, kind of little coding buddy. Whereas like Codex feels kind of like colder, maybe like just heavy.
It's
Like, ooh, I'm
it's
gonna give it a thing, and it's like
syntax. Yeah.
it's a heavy thing to kick off because it's just gonna like think for a long, long time. But like I actually keep them left and right because sometimes I'm like, this is for Codex, or this is for Claude. So
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I was doing that with GPT-5 versus Opus,
mm,
but Sonnet 4.5 has taken me off. Like I've gone off of the $200 a month
yeah,
ChatGPT plan and on to the Claude plan. But I think I'll have to pay more attention. But I feel like Sonnet 4.5 doesn't have as many. I was noticing with Opus 4.1 that it would just get lost in
mm,
architectural stuff, and you can just lose so much time if you make a mistake
yeah,
there. And GPT-5, even though it would only respond to me in like half sentences, it was always very angry with me and curt.
yeah,
It like crushed that stuff. And actually, the first time I used it, it was almost too powerful. It changed too many
yeah,
things too quickly, and it was like, whoa, I can't drive. It's like getting into a Formula One car. It's like I'm not
yeah.
prepared
You
to
got to
to
rein
drive
it
this.
in.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I
Um,
started going down to like medium reasoning. There's a funny thing here where like if someone gives me a reasoning dial, I just crank it up to max. Like I'm like, why would I want the dumber model? But like then it's like finally okay, I try it on medium. Like, oh, medium's pretty good, and sometimes you want it to be faster. So
mm.
I mean, the future is probably some kind of router that's sort of intelligent on figuring out like if there's not a really complex task, like do it quickly, and if it's hard, spend a lot of time. But we still have these kind of crude dials on like I have to
I
decide like
can't believe they
what
give
kind
me
of
a nod for
complexity.
that. I have no idea what to do with it. I'm like, what
Yeah,
do we
I've
do?
gone
Yeah.
back to medium, and like that seems to be the recommended mode, is just like use it on medium. It seems to be like reasonably good at like kind of thinking less or more. I mean,
At that
the
point,
Claude
why have
stuff,
it? Why have it? If you're just gonna tell people to use it
yeah,
on Medium, just get rid
I
of
know.
it. Ship it on Medium.
Yeah, I mean, they don't probably don't want people like me just using it on high all day long. It's like probably pretty expensive. I mean, the Claude, I never coded with Opus much. I tried it, and it did feel like a bit of an overthinker. Like,
Mm,
Sonnet just feels like a sort of better day to day. The one thing I love for Opus though is like I still think it's the best writing model. Actually, like
mm.
GPT 4.5, I might be the only one that used that one. Like that one was like really good at writing, and it was like funny. That would have like personality. It's probably like so expensive to run that they just like had to get rid of it. I think Opus is pretty expensive too, so I wasn't coding with Opus because I would just hit the limits for Claude pretty quickly, whereas
Yeah.
you could cut all day long on Sonnet. But I actually recently I'm on the Claude whatever the max plan right now, and
Supermax all the way to the top.
well, I hit the limit, which I hadn't hit before, and
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was doing anything different than I do, but I was pasting in docs links, and some people don't have Markdown. Whenever I could just like copy the Markdown, I'd give it that. But I think I was just pasting, like I think it was Convex doesn't have like easy to grab, like so I just pasted it, and then somebody was like, oh, that's like 3 MB. So I'm guessing that's why I like hit this limit, and so I was like, huh. So I switched to the API, which I haven't used in a while, and one interesting thing I noticed is when you give it an API key, you're paying as you go, but it's actually faster. Like they run it more. I think they do it more in parallel, where like
Mm,
an edit comes in and I'm kind of reviewing the edit. I'm like, yeah, save that looks good. The other one's like right there. Whereas I think on the
mm.
Max plan, I imagine they have to throttle it to some extent or rate limit it. But
Interesting.
um,
I don't know. I was spending so much but I'm an Opus guy. This
yeah,
was 4.1. Uh, anyway.
Opus has good vibes.
Yeah.
My chat's always Opus. I'm like, yo, Opus, here's what we're doing. And it's like, it's my spec writer. It's just like, hey, anything creative, it's got good taste and design. It's like, that's Opus.
Yeah.
And then my little like delivery coding, it's like, Sonnet, just kind of cranking things out. But yeah.
I love it. All right. Well, what are you working on next? When do we get new fuzzy stuff? See,
Yeah, I got a
Marcia?
blog post in the work. Mostly I'm slow now because I have an actual kind of day job that I've made up for myself, which is my wife and I always had a rule that we would never work at the same place. And we were on a hike the side of a creek in the mountains and we got sort of excited enough about an idea that we're like, we gotta go build this. So
I'm
we're
so
it's
excited
gonna
for
be
this
fun.
idea.
And
Yeah.
it's gonna be super fun. I mean, so the other thing, I was a CEO twice. I did two startups. Neither was particularly successful. I've learned that it's just, building something people want is hard. Product market
Yeah.
fits everything. Like that's the only thing that matters as a startup. It's very hard to do. So, but I was sort of like reluctantly the CEO both times, and okay, I got to do all this sort of fundraising stuff and recruiting and finding all the customers and like. Now it's like my wife does. I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to just like sit and code and like build a prototype for the meeting tomorrow, and then like do it again the next day. It's like I'm in my happy place, man. So yeah, it's really fun.
Well, enjoy. We will, I'm sure, talk soon. And, let us know what you think. Tell your friends, tell people you don't even like.